In the humid spring of 1811, as workers tore down the skeletal remains of an old tobacco warehouse in Richmond, Virginia, their crowbars struck something that wasn't just wood or stone. Beneath the splintered groan of rotting floorboards, in the cloying, earthy darkness, they unearthed a secret that would stain the city's history for generations. There, nestled in the damp soil, were 8 identical wooden boxes, their surfaces warped by time. Inside each lay a man's wedding ring and a small, corked vial filled with a pale, medicinal powder. The rings bore different names, different dates, but they all shared a single, chilling connection. They had once belonged to the husbands of Ruth Holloway, a woman of impeccable grace who had, against all odds, outlived 8 wealthy and powerful men in the span of just 30 years. What authorities would soon discover within those vials would unravel everything they thought they knew about the refined widow, a woman who had once been the celebrated toast of Virginia society. Citing matters of a delicate nature that could irrevocably tarnish the reputations of prominent families, the local magistrate ordered the discovery sealed, burying the truth in a tomb of official silence. For over 2 centuries, this case has remained a ghost in the archives of the Virginia Historical Society. But tonight, we are about to open that tomb and uncover the terrifying truth behind one of America's most methodical and cold-blooded killers. Before we delve deeper into the life and deadly marriages of Ruth Holloway, I want to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to explore America's darkest historical mysteries with us, and let me know in the comments what state you're listening from. I love connecting with fellow mystery lovers from every corner of the country. The tale of Ruth Holloway begins not with murder, but with a tragedy so profound it would irrevocably shape the course of 8 men's lives and deaths. The Virginia of 1780 was a land reborn in revolution and haunted by its bloody aftermath. In the fertile tobacco region surrounding Richmond and Petersburg, grand plantations stretched languidly along the James River, their white columned mansions standing as gleaming monuments to a newfound American prosperity built on old sins. The Revolutionary War had concluded just 3 years prior, but its scars, both visible and hidden, ran deep through the heart of Virginia society. Loyalist properties had been seized and redistributed, forging a new class of wealthy patriots while leaving others utterly destitute. It was into this world of shifting fortunes, simmering resentments, and buried secrets that Ruth Holloway would emerge, a phantom of grace and sorrow. Ruth arrived in Richmond in the crisp autumn of 1782, a striking woman of 28 with auburn hair and eyes the precise color of winter fog. She presented herself as the widow of Captain Jonathan Holloway, a Continental Army officer who, she claimed with heartbreaking poise, had fallen at the Battle of Yorktown. Her story was simple, elegant, and deeply tragic. She had lost everything in the war and now sought to build a new life in Virginia, drawn by whispers of the state's prosperity and the legendary kindness of its people. What made Ruth truly remarkable was not just her haunting beauty, but an intelligence and refinement that seemed almost out of place. She spoke with the cultured accent of educated New England, could read Latin, and possessed a seemingly encyclopedic knowledge of medicinal herbs and treatments. In an era when medical care was a primitive and often brutal affair, Ruth's healing touch quickly made her invaluable to Richmond's elite. She carried with her a worn, leather-bound journal filled with remedies passed down, she claimed, through generations of her family. The Virginia gentry, hungry for culture and companionship, welcomed Ruth with open arms. The war had created a dire shortage of eligible women. Many had died from disease or fled with loyalist families. Here was a refined widow of impeccable manners who could discuss politics with the men and the healing arts with the women. Within months of her arrival, Ruth had established herself in a modest but respectable house on Clay Street, supporting herself by treating ailments that ranged from the dreaded consumption to nervous disorders. But beneath Richmond's polished, genteel surface, darker currents flowed. The war had created not just heroes, but profiteers and traitors. In candlelit drawing rooms, whispered conversations spoke of men who had switched loyalties for British gold, of supply convoys mysteriously ambushed by those who knew their routes, of patriot leaders betrayed to enemy forces. Some suspected the existence of a secret organization that had collaborated with the British, but proof remained as elusive as smoke. These men had not only survived the war, but had thrived in its aftermath, their treason rewarded with seized loyalist estates and lucrative government contracts. It was in this atmosphere of prosperity built upon betrayal that Ruth Holloway would begin her deadly courtship with Virginia's most prominent citizens. She seemed to possess an uncanny ability to attract the attention of the state's most successful men, tobacco merchants, shipping magnates, land speculators, and political figures. Each would fall helplessly under her spell. Each would marry her with great ceremony. And each would die under circumstances that, while suspicious to modern eyes, seemed perfectly, tragically natural to their contemporaries. The first hint that something was profoundly amiss came not from a doctor or a magistrate, but from an unexpected source: the enslaved people who worked in the great houses where Ruth's husbands lived and died. They whispered among themselves, in hushed tones in kitchens and stables, about the strange, swift illnesses that befell their masters after marriage. The pattern was always the same. It began with complaints of agonizing stomach pain, followed by a debilitating weakness, and ended, inevitably, in death. But in a society where their testimony carried no legal weight, their astute observations were dismissed as mere superstition and jealousy. The first death occurred on a humid August night in 1783, less than 6 months after Ruth had married Colonel Edmund Fairfax, one of Richmond's most successful tobacco merchants. Fairfax, a robust man of 45 who had never shown a day's sickness, was found dead in his study by his house servant Jupiter, at the first light of dawn on August 15. Jupiter would later recount to other slaves what he had witnessed that night, a chilling testimony that would never reach white ears. He had been awakened around midnight by sounds from his master's study, not the usual rustle of papers or the clink of a brandy glass, but something else entirely. A low, guttural moaning, followed by the violent scrape of a chair being pushed back from a desk. When Jupiter crept to the window to investigate, the scene that met his eyes froze the blood in his veins. He saw his master doubled over, clutching his stomach in agony, while Mrs. Ruth stood beside him, her expression one of perfect concern, offering him a steaming cup of what appeared to be medicinal tea. "Drink this, my dear Edmund," Jupiter heard her say, her voice a soothing balm. "It will ease the pain. I prepared it with special care." Colonel Fairfax raised his head with a visible, shuddering effort. His face, Jupiter noted with alarm, was ashen and slick with perspiration despite the cool night air. "The pain. It's getting worse, Ruth. Perhaps we should call for Dr. Harrison." Ruth's hand rested gently, almost lovingly, on her husband's shoulder. "Nonsense, darling. Dr. Harrison is miles away. And besides, this remedy has been used in my family for generations. Trust me." Her voice carried that same melodic quality that had so charmed Richmond society, but in the oppressive darkness, Jupiter detected something else beneath it, a note of cold insistence that brooked no argument. The colonel drank from the cup. Within minutes, his moaning intensified into a choked cry. Jupiter watched in horror as his master convulsed once, twice, then collapsed forward onto his desk, sending papers and inkwells scattering to the floor in a chaotic crash. Ruth stood perfectly still for a long moment, a statue in the gloom, simply watching. Then, with movements that seemed eerily calm for a woman who had just witnessed her husband's death throes, she retrieved the cup, rinsed it thoroughly in a basin of water she had apparently prepared in advance, and only then did she begin to scream for help. When Dr. Harrison arrived at dawn, he found Ruth in a state of convincing, theatrical grief, clutching her husband's lifeless body and weeping inconsolably. The symptoms she described, acute gastric distress, possibly brought on by tainted food or nervous excitement, were plausible. Colonel Fairfax had been involved in some contentious business dealings recently, she explained through her tears, and had complained of stomach problems for several days. Dr. Harrison's examination revealed nothing unusual. The colonel's body showed no signs of violence, and the gastric symptoms Ruth described were common enough in the Virginia climate, where spoiled food and impure water frequently caused similar ailments. He recorded the cause of death as acute gastric fever, and offered his deepest condolences to the grieving widow. What Dr. Harrison couldn't know, and what Ruth had meticulously counted on, was that the medicinal knowledge she claimed as family tradition actually came from a far more sinister source. During her journey to Virginia, Ruth had spent several weeks in Philadelphia, where she had cultivated an intimate relationship with a disgraced physician named Dr. Marcus Wainwright. Wainwright had been expelled from medical practice after experimenting with various plant extracts as a means of causing untraceable deaths. His research, conducted in secret and never published, had identified several native plants that could produce symptoms mimicking common illnesses while leaving no discernible trace in the body after death. Ruth had not only learned Wainwright's methods, but had improved upon them. She discovered that by combining small amounts of certain plant alkaloids with common medicinal herbs, she could create preparations that would ease genuine ailments when used in small doses, but prove fatal when administered in larger quantities or specific combinations. Her leather journal contained not cherished family remedies, but carefully recorded formulas for murder disguised as medicine. The funeral of Colonel Fairfax was attended by the cream of Richmond society. Ruth played the role of the grieving widow to perfection, fainting at the graveside and being supported by sympathetic friends. The Colonel's will, drawn up shortly after their marriage, left Ruth a substantial inheritance, including the house on Clay Street and a considerable sum in gold and land holdings. But Ruth's grief proved remarkably short-lived. Within 3 months of the funeral, she was seen accepting the attentions of another prominent gentleman, Captain William Randolph, a shipping magnate who had made his fortune running supplies to the Continental Army during the war. Those who remarked on the speed of her recovery were gently reminded that a woman alone in the world needed protection, and Captain Randolph was known to be a man of honor and substance. What none of Ruth's admirers suspected was that she had not chosen them at random. Each man she targeted shared a dark, common secret. They had all been members of a clandestine organization that had provided intelligence to British forces during the war. Colonel Fairfax had been the group's treasurer, responsible for distributing British gold to American traders. Ruth's seemingly chance arrival in Richmond and her subsequent romantic conquests were anything but coincidental. They were the opening moves in a chilling game of revenge that would claim 8 lives before it was finished. Captain William Randolph's death, barely 8 months after his marriage to Ruth in January 1784, followed an eerily similar pattern. The robust sea captain, known for his iron constitution, succumbed to what Dr. Harrison diagnosed as bilious fever after 3 days of intense stomach pain and weakness. By now, Jupiter had been sold to another household, but the slave community maintained its own network of information. Word spread quickly about the strange coincidence of another of Mrs. Ruth's husbands dying of stomach ailments. Old Caesar, who worked in the Randolph household, reported similar observations to those Jupiter had made, his master falling ill after accepting medicinal tea from his wife, Ruth's unnaturally calm demeanor during the crisis, and her insistence that no other physician be called. But it was Caesar who made a discovery that would prove crucial. While cleaning the captain's study after his death, Caesar found a small vial hidden behind a loose board in the wall. The vial contained a fine white powder that smelled faintly of almonds and bitter herbs. When he showed it to Jupiter during a chance meeting at the Richmond market, the older slave's face went pale. "Same thing I seen at Colonel Fairfax's house," Jupiter whispered, glancing around nervously. "Found one just like it in the kitchen after the master died. When I showed it to the cook, she made me throw it in the river and told me never to speak of it." The enslaved community began to keep their own careful, secret records, passing information through their network. They noted that Ruth always insisted on personally preparing her husband's medicines, that she kept her supplies locked in a special chest servants were never allowed to handle, and that she had an unusual knowledge of plants that grew wild in the Virginia countryside. Most disturbing of all, they observed that Ruth would often take long walks alone in the forests surrounding Richmond, returning with baskets of what appeared to be common herbs, which she guarded jealously. Meanwhile, Ruth's position in Richmond society grew stronger with each tragedy. Captain Randolph's will had left her even wealthier than before, and her reputation as a devoted wife who had suffered terrible losses earned her widespread sympathy. The leading families of Virginia competed to include her in their social circles. Ruth's third husband was Judge Thomas Henley, a prominent member of the Virginia House of Delegates. Their courtship was brief but passionate. They married in June 1785. Judge Henley survived exactly 7 months. His death in January 1786 was particularly shocking because it occurred during a dinner party at their home. Henley had been in excellent spirits until Ruth served him a special digestive tonic. Dr. Harrison, now called for the 3rd time, began to harbor private suspicions, but suspicion was not evidence, and Ruth's behavior remained beyond reproach. The pattern continued with ruthless precision. Husband number 4, plantation owner George Carrington, died of acute dyspepsia in 1787. Number 5, merchant Samuel Bradford, succumbed to nervous fever in 1788. Number 6, banker Edward Custis, was dead of gastric apoplexy in 1789. Each death made Ruth wealthier and more powerful. It was after the death of Edward Custis that a new player entered the game. Dr. Marcus Wainwright, the disgraced physician from Philadelphia, arrived in Richmond in late 1789. But Caesar, now working for a family near Wainwright's residence, noticed that Ruth made regular visits to the doctor's house, always arriving at dusk and leaving after dark. What Caesar couldn't know was that Wainwright had discovered Ruth's true identity and had come to Richmond not for redemption, but for profit. He knew what Ruth was doing, and he wanted his share. Their arrangement was simple. He would provide her with new methods of poisoning, and she would pay him a percentage of each inheritance. But Wainwright made a fatal miscalculation. He failed to understand that Ruth's murders were not motivated by simple greed, but by a desire for justice that burned with an intensity that would not be compromised. The mysterious deaths were building toward a climax that would shake Virginia's foundations. Ruth had identified the remaining members of the secret organization that had betrayed her first husband. Only 2 names remained on her original list: Dr. Harrison himself, and the most prominent target of all, Governor Edmund Randolph, the powerful politician who had coordinated the entire treasonous operation. The autumn of 1790 brought an unexpected complication. A new arrival in Richmond would prove to be both Ruth's greatest challenge and the key to unraveling her deadly plan. Captain Jonathan Hale was a former Continental Army intelligence officer investigating wartime treason cases for the federal government. Unofficially, he was tracking rumors of the secret organization. His investigation had led him to identify several members of this network, and he had noted with alarm that many of them had died under mysterious circumstances in recent years. What made Captain Hale particularly dangerous was his military training in recognizing patterns. Unlike local authorities who saw only coincidence, Hale saw a deliberate campaign of elimination. Hale's first significant discovery came through his friendship with Dr. Harrison. During a casual conversation, the doctor mentioned his growing unease about the pattern of deaths among Ruth's husbands. "It's most peculiar, Jonathan," Dr. Harrison confided. "Mrs. Holloway seems to have the most dreadful luck with husbands. Yet, she's one of the most attentive wives I've ever encountered. If I didn't know better, I'd swear she was trying to save them, rather than—" He paused, unwilling to voice his suspicion. Captain Hale leaned forward. "Rather than what, Doctor?" Harrison shook his head. "Forgive me. It's just that in 30 years of practice, I've never seen such a concentrated series of similar deaths." That night, Hale began his own investigation. What he discovered sent chills down his spine. There was no record of a Captain Jonathan Holloway in Continental Army files. The woman calling herself Ruth Holloway had appeared in Richmond with a completely fabricated identity. Meanwhile, Ruth had identified her 7th target, merchant Prince Alexander Fitzhugh, a secret member of the treasonous organization. His betrayal had been particularly heinous, using his position as a supplier to the Continental Army to gather intelligence on American movements. Ruth's courtship of Fitzhugh began in the winter of 1790. But this time, she faced scrutiny. Captain Hale had quietly alerted several prominent citizens. When Fitzhugh announced his engagement, his friends urged caution. 7 husbands, 7 mysterious deaths, Alexander, warned a friend. Surely such a concentration of tragedy warrants some investigation. Fitzhugh, however, was completely under her spell. What he didn't know was that Ruth had been studying his role in wartime treason through documents she had stolen from Dr. Marcus Wainwright's files. Wainwright, in his attempts to blackmail Ruth, had discovered that her victims were all members of a secret society called the Covenant of Prosperity. This revelation convinced Ruth that her partner had become too dangerous. On a cold February night in 1791, Dr. Marcus Wainwright was found dead in his home, an apparent suicide. With him gone, Ruth believed the last external threat to her mission was eliminated. Alexander Fitzhugh married Ruth Holloway on March 15, 1791. Captain Hale attended, watching her carefully. The marriage lasted 4 months. Alexander Fitzhugh died on July 20, 1791. Dr. Harrison, now deeply suspicious, performed the most thorough examination of his career but found nothing. Ruth's performance as the grieving widow reached new heights of theatrical skill. With Fitzhugh's death, she had eliminated 7 of the 8 members of the Covenant of Prosperity. Only one target on her original list remained, Dr. Harrison himself. But Ruth had not anticipated that Captain Hale's investigation would lead him to uncover her true identity. In the files of a captured British intelligence officer, Hale found references to a spy network that included a woman identified only as the widow. Cross-referencing this information, Hale made a shocking discovery. Captain Jonathan Holloway had indeed existed, but he had been a British spy operating under deep cover. He had been captured and executed by American forces in 1779 after being betrayed by members of his own spy network, the same network that would later become the Covenant of Prosperity. Ruth Holloway was not seeking justice for patriot betrayal. She was seeking revenge for the death of a traitor. Her campaign of murder was not justice, but treason itself. This revelation changed everything. Captain Hale's discovery came at a critical moment, for he learned that she had already begun her final courtship. Her 8th and last target was not Dr. Harrison, as Hale had expected, but Governor Edmund Randolph himself, the most powerful man in Virginia and the secret leader of the Covenant of Prosperity. The governor's interest in Ruth had been carefully cultivated. Unlike her previous targets, Governor Randolph was already married, but his wife was frequently ill. Ruth approached him not as a vulnerable widow, but as a woman of independent means, a valuable political ally. What made this courtship particularly dangerous was that Governor Randolph was a man of considerable intelligence. If anyone could recognize Ruth's true nature, it would be him. But Ruth had one crucial advantage. She knew exactly what kind of man Randolph was, while he saw her only as she chose to present herself. In the spring of 1792, Governor Randolph's wife died. Ruth attended the funeral with perfect propriety. During this interlude, Captain Hale made a desperate attempt to warn the governor, laying out his evidence. The suspicious deaths, Ruth's fabricated identity, the connection to wartime treason. But Hale's revelations had an unexpected effect. Rather than being alarmed, Randolph was impressed by her skill. "Captain Hale," the governor said coolly, "I appreciate your concern. But if she has indeed been eliminating enemies of the state, then she has been performing a valuable service." Hale left the meeting with a growing sense of dread. The governor had not only dismissed his warnings but seemed interested in allying himself with a known killer. What Hale didn't know was that Governor Randolph had already conducted his own investigation. He knew about her real identity and her connection to the executed British spy. He knew he was likely her final target. But instead of fleeing, he decided to confront her directly, believing her desire for revenge could be redirected. The confrontation came during a private dinner at the governor's mansion in June 1792. "Mrs. Holloway," the governor said as they sat in his study. "Or should I say, Mrs. Jonathan Holloway, widow of the British agent executed for treason in 1779. It's time we spoke honestly." Ruth's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the vial of poison she always carried, but she stopped. She saw no fear in his eyes, only amused interest. "I see we understand each other," Randolph continued. "I know all about your campaign of revenge. I know you've eliminated 7 of the 8 members, and you believe me to be the 8th. Ruth's gray eyes never left his face. "And are you not afraid, Governor? You betrayed my husband. You've watched me kill 7 men without lifting a finger. What makes you think I won't complete my work tonight?" Randolph smiled coldly. "Because, my dear Mrs. Holloway, you need me alive more than you need me dead. You see, there were not 8 members of the Covenant of Prosperity. There were 9. The revelation hit Ruth like a physical blow. For over a decade, she had believed her list was complete. Now, there was one more traitor. Who? She whispered, her composure finally cracking. Captain Jonathan Hale, the governor replied. The man who has been investigating you. He was the Covenant's intelligence analyst, the one who identified your husband as a security risk and recommended his elimination. He's been hunting you not out of duty, but out of fear that you would eventually discover his role in your husband's death. And just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Richmond intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this deadly game of revenge and betrayal. The game between Ruth Holloway and Governor Randolph was about to enter its final, most dangerous phase, with Captain Hale as the unwitting prize. Governor Randolph's revelation transformed Ruth's mission from a simple quest for revenge into a complex web of betrayal. But the governor had miscalculated. He assumed her desire for complete vengeance would make her his partner. Instead, it only intensified her determination to eliminate every member of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. You propose an alliance, Governor, Ruth said, her voice steady. But what assurance do I have that you won't betray me as you betrayed my husband? Randolph leaned back. Because, my dear, we each possess information that could destroy the other. We are bound together by mutual assured destruction. But Ruth had already made her decision. She now knew the identity of her ninth and final target. There would be no alliance. There would only be death. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Ruth appeared to accept Randolph's proposal while secretly preparing to eliminate both him and Captain Hale. The governor, meanwhile, believed he had recruited a valuable assassin, planning to dispose of her once she had served her purpose. Captain Hale, unaware his true identity had been discovered, continued his investigation. The climax began on the evening of August 15, 1792, exactly 9 years after Colonel Fairfax's death. Ruth had invited both Governor Randolph and Captain Hale to a private dinner at her mansion. Each man accepted, believing he held the upper hand. The dinner proceeded with perfect civility, but beneath the surface, a deadly tension was building. Ruth had prepared her most sophisticated poisoning scheme yet. For Governor Randolph, a slow-acting compound derived from foxglove and hemlock, mixed into a special brandy that would simulate a heart attack. Captain Hale would receive a different fate, a contact poison applied to the rim of his wine glass that would cause symptoms resembling apoplexy hours later, removing any direct connection to the dinner. But Ruth had not anticipated that Governor Randolph would arrive already knowing her plans. Through his network of informants, he had learned of her preparations and, most damningly, had discovered her journal, containing detailed records of all her previous murders. As they sat down, Ruth noticed Randolph seemed unusually relaxed, while Hale appeared tense. The conversation turned philosophical. I've always believed, Ruth said, serving the main course, that those who betray trust deserve to face the consequences. Governor Randolph nodded. Indeed, Mrs. Holloway. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Captain Hale, increasingly uncomfortable, interjected, surely, revenge is ultimately destructive. The rule of law exists to prevent individuals from taking justice into their own hands. Ruth's smile was cold. But Captain, what happens when the law itself has been corrupted by those who deserve punishment? It was at that moment Captain Hale realized he was not merely a guest, but a target. His hand moved instinctively toward his pistol, but Governor Randolph's sharp glance warned him against it. Gentlemen, Ruth said, rising. I believe it's time we move to the library for brandy and honest conversation. In the library, with the heavy curtains drawn and the servants dismissed, Ruth faced them, holding 2 glasses of brandy. The truth is, she said, her voice like ice, neither of you will leave this room alive tonight. Governor Randolph, you will die because you led the conspiracy that murdered my husband. Captain Hale, you will die because you identified him as a risk. Your deaths will complete my mission. Governor Randolph's composure finally cracked. Mrs. Holloway, you underestimate the consequences of murdering a sitting governor. Ruth's laugh was genuinely amused. "Governor, I have killed 8 prominent men without ever being seriously suspected. What makes you think killing you and Captain Hale will present any greater challenge?" Captain Hale, his military training taking over, lunged toward her. But Ruth was ready. She threw the contents of one brandy glass, not poison, but a powerful irritant, directly into his face. As Hale stumbled backward, clawing at his burning eyes, Ruth drew a small pistol from beneath her shawl. Governor Randolph, seeing his opportunity, tried to tackle her, but she spun with fluid grace, bringing the pistol to bear on his chest. "I don't think so, Governor," she said calmly. "After all these years of planning, I'm not about to let either of you spoil my moment of triumph." The confrontation revealed the full extent of Ruth's transformation. "You want to know the truth about your precious covenant of prosperity?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "It was a group of ambitious men who sold information to whoever paid the most. You betrayed my husband not because he was a threat to American independence, but because he had discovered your own treason and was preparing to expose you to both sides." Governor Randolph's face went pale. "How could you possibly know that?" "Governor," Ruth smiled coldly, "you made the mistake of assuming a woman motivated by love would be less thorough than a man motivated by ambition. I have spent 13 years tracking down every scrap of evidence." Captain Hale, his vision gradually clearing, finally understood. "Dear God," he whispered, "you're seeking revenge for the corruption that killed your husband." Ruth nodded. "Finally, Captain, you understand. Jonathan was indeed a British agent, but he was also my husband and the father of the child I lost when I fled after his execution. Your conspiracy didn't just kill him. It destroyed everything I loved. It turned me into the weapon I have become." Governor Randolph, in a desperate final plea, offered her power. "Mrs. Holloway, spare me, and together we could control not just Virginia, but the entire federal government." Ruth's response was chilling. "Governor, you still don't understand. This was never about power or wealth. This was about love. Love for a man you murdered. Love for a life you destroyed. Power corrupts. But love endures. And love demands satisfaction." The bodies of Governor Edmund Randolph and Captain Jonathan Hale were discovered the following morning. The scene told a clear, tragic story, a violent confrontation that ended in a murder-suicide. The governor was found with a bullet wound to the chest, Captain Hale's pistol clutched in his hand. Captain Hale lay nearby, apparently having succumbed to chemical burns and a blow to the head from a shattered decanter. Ruth Holloway was discovered bound and gagged in a closet, a horrified victim. Her account to Dr. Harrison was heartbreaking and convincing. She explained that Captain Hale had arrived in an agitated state, making wild accusations of treason against the governor. The confrontation escalated, a pistol was drawn, and in the struggle, it discharged. The investigation was cursory. The authorities concluded that the two men had killed each other in a dispute. The documents Hale had supposedly brought to support his claims were found burned in the fireplace. What they didn't know was that Ruth had orchestrated every detail. The documents were forgeries she created to provide a motive. The chemical that blinded Hale was a compound she developed to leave evidence consistent with an accidental injury. Even her own injuries were self-inflicted. The deaths of Randolph and Hale marked the end of Ruth Holloway's campaign of revenge. With all 9 members of the Covenant of Prosperity eliminated, she had achieved her dark justice. In the months following, Ruth gradually withdrew from society, claiming trauma. She sold her mansion and moved to a smaller, elegant house where she lived quietly. But she had not lost her taste for control. Over the following years, she became a behind-the-scenes power broker in Virginia politics, using her wealth and her knowledge of secrets to influence elections and business deals. She never remarried. The true extent of her influence became apparent only after her death in 1834, at the age of 80. Among her papers, investigators found detailed records not only of her 9 murders but of dozens of other schemes. Most shocking of all was the discovery of her complete journal, written in a code that took months to decipher. It revealed her campaign against the Covenant had been only the beginning of her career as what she called an agent of necessary justice. "I have become something that perhaps God never intended to exist," she wrote in a final entry, "but which the corruption of this world has made necessary. I am justice without law, retribution without mercy, and order without government." The discovery created a sensation, but authorities faced an impossible problem. Many of the people she claimed to have killed were prominent citizens whose reputations could not be tarnished without causing social upheaval. In the end, the decision was made to seal the journal. The story of Ruth Holloway remained buried for nearly 2 centuries. Modern forensic experts who have studied her techniques concluded she was far ahead of her time, a master of undetectable murder. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of her story is not her skill as a killer, but her success as a manipulator of public perception. For over 50 years, she maintained a reputation as a tragic figure, while secretly operating as one of the most prolific murderers in American history. She proved that the most dangerous criminals are not those who operate outside society, but those who learn to control it from within. This mystery shows us how revenge, when pursued with methodical intelligence, can corrupt even the most refined exterior into something monstrous. What do you think of this story? Do you believe someone could really carry out such an elaborate campaign without being detected? Leave your comment below and share your theories. If you enjoyed this tale, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves dark mysteries. Until next time, remember that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most civilized, and the greatest crimes are those that history chooses to forget. See you in the next video.